how do we convince the electorate that Scotland is a financial net contributor to the UK rather than a drain its resource? And from Stephen Aitkenhead, will this direct UK spending be taken from the so-called block grant? So let's bounce these around a wee bit.
Yeah, these are difficult areas because you know, they are complex. You know, when people talk about GERS and you know our tax base and relative to spending, it's very difficult then to extrapolate that into predictions for independence, because we're looking at snapshots in time in the devolved scenario. So, you know, yes, Scotland, you know, more than makes its way in the UK. You know, we perform from an economic perspective better than any other nation or region outside of the southeast, which is obviously a magnet and a vacuum to investment and to capital spending and all the things that we want to see distributed better. So it's complex to explain that. It is about an element of education and trying to boil it down into, you know, what matters the most. But you know, the fundamental for me is independence gives us the power to choose on all these areas, and it's about prioritization. Politics and economics is always about what you prioritize. So at the moment, we're having to live within a fixed budget, and we're having to take decisions that are within a fixed budget, and we have to live within those means. We don't have substantial borrowing powers. Imagine what we could do, and look at what we are trying to do within that envelope. The Scottish Child Payment, the investment in health services, the investment in green infrastructure. Imagine what we could do if we're independent. And I was talking there earlier about the holistic, all-encompassing, you know, cross-departmental approach, where you're not just saying, right, your social security department is off doing this and your housing department's off doing this. If that was all joined up and working together in a more efficient manner and wasn't having to worry about bouncing off the DWP or the Treasury in terms of having permission to do things, and was able to join it up with our economic approach, which I believe should be about a well-being economy. It's not just measuring GDP. It's about, you know, how we make the lot of our citizens better, healthier. Then I think we're in a much better position. And you know, you only have to look at other countries across Europe and across the world in similar positions to see the possibilities that are there. For me, that's what it boils down to.
Yeah, I mean, and again, this is such an interesting area, because we know that some sectors of our community we'll talk to are interested in understanding it from a financial perspective. And one of the challenges is that the data that emerges, which you mentioned, GERS, there, Government Expenditure Revenues Scotland, when you get the data, it's looking at the statistics that were. And you also make the point that it's looking at statistics as being part of a UK framework, where many of the items appearing on GERS are estimates, and that they are deemed to have been spent on behalf of Scotland, not by Scotland. So obviously, if Scotland were independent, we wouldn't choose to spend the amount of money on new additional nuclear warheads, for example, that the UK government. Plus, you would like to think that they would run it more efficiently, because many of the departments, and they're notorious for this, if you look at some of the committee reports coming out of Westminster, that some of the public departments are notoriously inefficient, and we've talked about earlier decreasing levels of accountability. And you also make the point about, you know, well, what works for people, because it is quite complex to explain how it all works. And so some people will be very interested to know that. Other people will be much more gravitate towards the art of the possible. What could we be doing? And you've set that out very well. In terms of Stephen's question, will this direct UK spending being taken from the so-called block grant? Well, it's worthwhile bearing in mind that Stephen, the Tories for really quite some time have been bumping their gums about the Barnett formula, which is the mechanism by how funding is placed at the moment. They really want to get their hands on it because the Barnett formula recognises some of the geographical disparities, for example, that Scotland has and the lack of infrastructure therein. So they do want to try and change that. But the structural funds, for example, that Neil mentioned, well, that is money that should have been coming to Scotland for the Scottish government to decide how it's spent. So it is a matter of democracy and it is a matter of accountability. And these themes keep on emerging all of the time.
And sorry, Michelle, they've been doing their best, doing their damnedest for the last number of years, not just under Boris, but under Theresa May as well. Go back to budgets where they use their sophistry, their financial wizardry within the Treasury to ensure that the schemes that they're announcing are not Barnettised. So we're not getting the benefit of things that we should be getting the benefit of. And a classic example there is the money that was spent on the DUP's bung in Northern Ireland during the time of the Brexit negotiations, the £2 billion. Scotland was shortchanged by £4 billion from that. So we're never going to get a fair deal as part of the UK. No matter what the Scottish Tory MPs or MSPs say about how grateful we should be for the money that arrives back at our door, having been rinsed through the Treasury several times and come out cut to ribbons. We're never going to get a fair deal there. It's about controlling our own resources and deciding for ourselves by our own democratically elected politicians how this money should be spent, the priorities that we have for it.
I mean, and of course, I couldn't agree more. And I'll just say a last wee piece before we're going to show my crowdfunding video in a minute or two. But I strongly agree with you. And I suppose I have quite a deep fear now that the Tories will seek to neuter the Scottish Parliament. I don't think they would go as far as trying to close it down, but to neuter its capacity to deal with things differently, which was fundamentally the way it was set up. And I suppose in answer to the Tories, I often say to them, because they like to class themselves as people, they often have many business people who say, well, they're all into accountability, create a better life. And I always say to them, so why then, in the matter of the future of your country, do you abrogate responsibility for that future and give control to your nearest competitor who clearly doesn't have your interests at heart? And I have to say, I haven't found one yet that is able to answer that.